Good morning, everybody. I really appreciate being here. I'm also really nervous, which I thought I wouldn't be because I know all of you. But when you're the one coming up here and you're the one making your own PowerPoint, like you could wet yourself, it's really scary. All right, so I'm going to talk a little bit about who I am and why I'm doing what I'm doing. Plus, you're going to probably hear a little bit more about another side of my life that's different than what you're accustomed to hearing about. So, next slide. There you go. This woman literally stepped into my life and totally changed the course of my life. Janice Humphrey is a friend of mine. I met her off and on throughout my life at various conferences, but she was the author of the book that was well known. It started, she published the first version in 1995, edition 1, and now we're on the 5th edition. The book was called So You Want to Be an Interpreter. And what happened was, I was at a conference in 2019, and her and her husband walked into my workshop. It was like God was visiting me. I was like, oh my gosh, she's here. She's like my hero. And she just walks across as if it was just normal. And I'm like, so she sits at the end over there, and so I teach this very short 2-hour workshop. And what ends up happening is she comes up to me and says, do you mind if I say something to the room? And I said, sure. So I hand her the microphone, and she says, if you'll do what Bill Ross tells you, you'll be an excellent interpreter. And I'm standing there going, bow, 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 thank you. Well, at the end of that, she also asked me, she says, where are your articles? Where are your publications? And I said, I don't really do that. I present my research based in workshops. I train other interpreters to become better interpreters. So she followed up with a simple question that changed everything in my life. She said, do you want to help me revise So You Want to Be an Interpreter, the 4th edition? Because it was last printed in 2007. And so from that day forward, I started working with her on the 5th edition. I ended up becoming the director of operations for her company called H&H Publishing. And H&H Publishing, ironically, was based in Vancouver, Washington, where she was living at the time. Well, in addition to that, we did a search for H&H Publishing. And do you know that they have an H&H Publishing in Florida? And they also sell textbooks? So every time you did a search, our company never came up. Never. It was always hers. It was always the people who own the math company. You know, math is not a good thing. You know, math is an acronym. Mental abuse towards humans. Those of you who are my math people, you'll relate. But if you're not my math people, don't talk to me later. All right, so here's the part that I didn't tell you. I was living in Texas with my wife and my family, and what happened was I was praying, and I have a quiet time every day. I read my Bible and pray every day. And I felt God speak to my heart and say, I want you to get published. And so, of course, I, knowing the plan of God, decided to write an article and send it into a friend to get published. So I co-authored this article with who else? The person who owns Hands Up Communications, Joseph Featherstone. And so we wrote this article about what it's like for a deaf person to have an interpreter show up looking like a slob, or not being competent, or whatever, guilty by association, if you will. So we wrote this article, and I thought, okay, so I'll get this published. So I sent it to the person I know who publishes articles, and I heard crickets. Nothing. Not to be outdone by God, of course, because a couple months later I'm asked to write this book with Jan Humphrey. Well, she just passed away recently, and the world lost someone who had a wealth of knowledge and experience and kindness that is irreplaceable. Don't get me wrong, she was a spitfire. If you got in her face, she could get in your face. But she was a person who cared about the profession. She cared about people who are deaf. And being a child of deaf adults, that means a lot to me. So we collaborated, and right now, click. Oh, you're already there. No, you can go back. So one of the things that I want to talk about, Coda, child of deaf adults. Both my mom and dad are deaf. The other interpreter sitting over there, her name is Leslie. Both of her parents are deaf. When you're a native user of American Sign Language, people have an expectation. And it's not always true. Like, I have cousins whose both parents are deaf, and they can't sign at all. It's like their idea of signing, I'm going to go outside, is I'm like, that was really beautiful. I saw all your dentures. You got a couple of fillings in there you need to work on, you know. So I also, just to know a little bit about me, I pastored 2 deaf churches. I was the pastor of a church in Springfield, Missouri for 5 years. I pastored a deaf church in Pittsfield, Massachusetts for 2.5 years. Deaf ministry is really challenging because most deaf people do not have an accessible understanding of who God is. The current research is saying about 8% of deaf people in the U.S. have an understanding of God, and they go to church. It's an unreached people group. If you're looking for a mission field, there's probably one right in your backyard. And the reason you don't know they're there is because deafness is invisible. You can't see it. They don't walk with a cane. They don't, you can't tell that person's deaf. And you probably have been rude to one unintentionally. Like my mother, I don't know how many times she'd be in the market and somebody come up behind her and say, excuse me. And by the time they said it the 4th time, they were kind of yelling at her. And I would say, oh, she can't hear you, jerk. I left off the last part. My wife is really behind me on this venture, this publishing company. So what happened was Jan's health started to decline, and her husband, Gary, and Jan willed the company to me. And I was like, why don't we launch a new company? And so we did. And we named it Humphrey and Ross, and I chose the name because I wanted to honor her. I genuinely believe that had she not stepped in my life, I would not be where I am today. I am a writer because it is my passion. It is what I do. And I want to be a publisher because I believe that other people have a story to tell. Some of those stories are very technical and business related. Some of them are very spiritual. Some of them are very personal. Everybody has a story to tell. We learn best through stories. When someone tells you, let me tell you a story, we pay attention because stories are sometimes better than strategic presented speeches. Stories are what get people's attention. So our company is a traditional publishing company. We are not a self-publisher. We are not a vanity press. And what that basically means is that our company offers royalty rates that are according to publishers that are publishing companies. So here's the biggest difference, and I'll show the next slide in a minute, but I want to explain that when you want to be a publisher, the first thing I tell people is, can you take constructive feedback? Can people talk about your work to you and you not freak out? Do you know your audience? Do you know who you're writing to? If you don't, find out. Because if you have, well, I just want to get this book out. Well, who's going to read it? Do you know? Who's your audience? Who are you writing to? What do you have that makes your book better than someone else's? What do you say? What do you do that makes you more unique than other people? What do you offer that makes your book more appealing? What makes you you? Why does anybody want to buy your book and someone else's? And will they buy it more than once? So what we're trying to tell you is that publishing companies will work with you on the editing, the design, the cover, the layout, the look, the whole thing from start to finish. So let's, real quick, one more slide, All right, these are the 2 of the books that we sell. Just to let you know, these are the most frequently used textbook in the nation with regard to sign language interpreting. But I'm not content there. We are going to revise the second one over there, Decisions. It's not going to be a new edition, it's going to be a revision. That book is already going into 6th revision, and we're working on it now. But that's not what's really important. What's important to me is, next slide, telling you what you need to do to get your book published. Our company is selective. We're not going to publish every single book. So if you come to me and say, I have this book, this idea for a horror story, I'll say, keep going. Because I don't do that kind of stuff. We're a niche market. We focus on specific markets. Right now we're in the process of publishing Kendra's book. And I'm telling you, it's really, really exciting. We sent it off to the printer today, and he called back and he said, things are looking good. We'll get a quote out to you at the end of the day. Here's the difference between traditional publishers and self-publishers. When you do self-publishing, you pay for everything. You're responsible for everything. Every single thing that has to be done. The cover, the layout, the editing, everything is done by you. That's self-publishing. You're responsible for all of it. And if you're not good at design, if you don't understand what font something should be or how the page should be laid out, it'll show. But then you go to a publishing company, what we typically refer to as vanity press. Vanity press, they will do all of it for you for a price. They will be responsible for all of it. I have several very good friends who just got both of their two different people, two different books, published from different publishing companies, and neither company is doing their marketing for them. So they're the ones telling everyone, oh, buy my book, buy my book, buy my book. That's not how publishing should be. Money should flow towards the author, not away from the author. Next slide. Oh, you got it. So go back one. This is the last one. These are vanity press self-publishing companies. Be careful. Do your research. I've heard Spines is the best, most friendly, most reasonable, most best, most of the most. Amazon will eat you alive, but they have a system. But they'll eat you alive because they're so big. You are just one of many to them. So right now, what we need is to figure out how to improve the quality of our company. We're moving slow because we are focusing on 4 areas: management, how we run the day-to-day operations. We're focusing on mailing. Basically, we ship out books. We ship them out individually. We ship them out in bulk. And then we're also working on marketing. Marketing is probably my weakest area, and I'll explain more about that if you ask questions about it. And then writing. I write. I'm not just running the show, I'm writing the books. Right now I'm partway through writing a story called I Am Coda, and it's basically the story of what it's like to grow up as a child of deaf adults and what that looks like. So I have 2 beta readers. They read every chapter that I write. They give me feedback. So that's kind of where we're at. Any questions?
All right. Round of applause for Bill.